She waited 3 days at the wrong depot. Until the cowboy found his mail-order bride asleep, Clara Bennett had never been so tired in her life. She sat on the worn wooden bench at the small, dusty depot, fanning herself with her hand and glancing at the clock above the ticket window. The heat of the late afternoon pressed down on the tiny town of Redstone Junction, and the wind carried fine particles of dust that clung stubbornly to her dress. She had arrived 3 days ago, full of hope and excitement, and yet no one had come for her. No cowboy, no welcoming committee, just the quiet hum of the prairie and the occasional squeak of the depot sign swaying in the breeze. The letters she had exchanged for months had painted a picture of Luke Callahan that seemed almost perfect. Tall, strong, kind, with a sense of humor hidden behind his stoic words. He had promised a life of adventure and comfort, of a home together in the vast open plains. Clara had dreamed of this meeting for weeks, imagining how she would recognize him immediately and how their first words would set the tone for their life together. But the reality of Redstone Junction was more like a ghost town than a welcoming stagecoach stop. Clara adjusted her hat and looked down the empty tracks, hoping for any sign of movement. Her luggage sat beside her, a small trunk and a neatly packed satchel, both worn but carefully preserved for the journey. She had planned her arrival carefully, arriving exactly on schedule according to the letters. She had asked about the depot's arrivals and departures, watched every train whistle that screamed through the station, and yet Luke had not appeared. The first day she had waited with optimism, convinced that perhaps a delay had kept him. The second day a trace of doubt crept in, but she had refused to let it show. By the third day, fatigue and worry mingled in her chest like two stubborn animals fighting for dominance. She wondered if she had misread the letters, miscalculated the time, or if she had even come to the wrong depot. Still, Clara refused to leave. She reminded herself that patience was part of life in the West, and she would wait as long as necessary. She had crossed mountains, ridden stagecoaches, and braved long train rides to arrive here. Giving up now would feel like letting the journey defeat her. She brushed a strand of hair from her face and took a deep breath, willing herself to stay calm. It was then she heard it, the soft, rhythmic clopping of hooves on the hard dirt road. She looked up, shielding her eyes from the bright sun, and saw a lone figure approaching. At first, she thought it might be another traveler, perhaps a trader or a ranch hand passing through. But as he drew closer, she noticed the worn boots, the long coat, and the wide-brimmed hat. This was no ordinary traveler. The cowboy slowed as he neared the depot, his eyes scanning the benches and the ticket window. When his gaze fell on her, he tipped his hat politely. "Morning," he said, his voice calm and steady. Clara's heart skipped a beat. "Good morning," she replied, standing quickly, unsure whether to bow, shake his hand, or simply smile. Her thoughts jumbled like the dust swirling around them. "Are you Clara Bennett?" he asked, studying her carefully. "Yes," she said, a nervous smile tugging at her lips. "And you must be Luke?" "I am," he replied, returning her smile. "Luke Callahan." "You've been waiting long?" Clara nodded. 3 days. I was beginning to wonder if I had come to the wrong place. She laughed softly, a little embarrassed. "But I guess we both had trouble finding each other." Luke's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Redstone Junction can be a little tricky to navigate. Not many expect a lady to wait here for 3 whole days." "Well," Clara said, adjusting the strap of her bag, "I've always liked a challenge." Luke chuckled. "I admire that. You've got patience." "Not many do." He glanced down the tracks, then back at her. "Shall we get you somewhere comfortable? I brought a horse. It's a bit of a ride to my ranch, but I think you'll find it worth the journey." Clara's nerves and exhaustion mingled with a spark of excitement. She followed him to a sturdy brown horse tethered under a small wooden shed. Luke helped her onto the saddle with surprising gentleness, making sure she was balanced and comfortable. She marveled at how natural he seemed with animals, the way he spoke softly to the horse as it shifted its weight beneath her. Together they rode out of Redstone Junction, leaving the quiet depot behind. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, golden and wild, with hills rolling into the distance and distant mountains shimmering like hazy mirrors in the afternoon sun. Clara felt the wind on her face and a thrill of freedom she had not known in years. Luke rode beside her, pointing out landmarks along the way. He told stories of the trails, of ranchers and settlers, of the occasional wild coyote that ran under the moonlight. Clara listened, her eyes wide with curiosity, laughing at his dry humor and clever observations. She began to see not only the man from the letters, but a companion who could teach her the ways of this new land. As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, they entered a small clearing. In the center stood a modest cabin, smoke curling lazily from the chimney. The sight filled Clara with relief and anticipation. Here was the home that would begin their life together. "This is it," Luke said, dismounting and offering her a hand. "It's simple, but it's ours. You'll like it." Clara followed him, her heart lifting. The cabin was small but cozy, with a hearth in one corner, a narrow bed covered in neatly folded blankets, and a table with 2 chairs. Shelves lined with books, tools, and jars of preserved food made the space practical and welcoming. Clara could almost imagine herself living here, tending to the home and sharing quiet evenings with Luke. "You've done well," Luke said, his voice soft. "The ride was long, and I wanted to make sure you were comfortable first." Clara smiled, feeling the weight of her exhaustion lift slightly. "Thank you," she said. She removed her hat and brushed her hair back, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease. "I'll leave you to rest," Luke said, dimming the lanterns to a soft glow. "You've had quite a journey. Sleep well." Clara sank onto the bed, the warmth of the fire and the gentle rocking of the cabin lulling her towards sleep. She thought of the 3 days she had spent waiting at the depot, the worry that had gnawed at her, and the relief of finally being found. Tomorrow would be a new beginning. A life with Luke, a home of their own, and the wide-open prairie stretching endlessly beyond. As her eyelids grew heavy, she allowed herself a small smile. She had waited, she had hoped, and now her patience had been rewarded. The quiet night wrapped around the cabin, carrying with it the promise of adventure, laughter, and companionship. And for the first time in days, Clara slept, safe and content, her dreams filled with the possibilities of the life ahead. Outside, the prairie shimmered in the moonlight. The wind whispered through the tall grass, and the stars sparkled like tiny lanterns over the endless plains. Tomorrow would bring more riding, more stories, and the start of a life that Clara had longed for. For now she rested, ready to meet the dawn with hope in her heart, and the cowboy she had waited so long to find by her side. The morning sun streamed through the cabin window, waking Clara with a soft glow that made the wooden walls shine warmly. She stretched and yawned, feeling the soreness of a long ride still in her legs. For the first time in days, she felt completely safe and at ease. The prairie outside the window seemed endless, a sea of golden grass rippling under the gentle wind. Birds called from the distant trees, and the faint sound of Luke moving outside drifted through the open door. Clara slipped from the bed, careful not to disturb the neat blankets, and tied her hair back. She felt a flutter of excitement mixed with nervousness. Today would be her first real day on the ranch, learning how Luke lived and discovering the rhythm of this new life. She had imagined such mornings many times, but now the quiet reality of the cabin made it feel more real than she had ever hoped. "Morning, Clara," Luke said, stepping inside with a warm smile. He carried a small basket of fresh bread and fruit. "I thought you might be hungry. There's coffee brewing, too, if you like it." "Thank you," she replied, smiling back. "That smells wonderful." They sat at the small table sharing the simple breakfast. Clara listened intently as Luke talked about the chores for the day, explaining which cattle needed to be checked, which fences needed to repair, and which areas of the ranch were best for exploring. His words were calm and matter-of-fact, but the pride in his voice was clear. This was his home, and he cared for it deeply. After breakfast, they prepared to ride out into the ranch. Clara adjusted her skirt and hat, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. Luke handed her a sturdy saddle and guided her to the horse he had chosen for her. "You'll find she's gentle, steady, and curious," he said with a wink. "Just like a good partner on the trail." Clara mounted the horse carefully, gripping the reins as she rose into the saddle. Luke followed beside her, leading another horse with supplies and tools. Together they moved across the wide open plains, the horse's hooves beating a rhythmic pattern against the hard dirt. Clara marveled at how the landscape changed with each mile, from golden fields to small patches of wildflowers, from dry creeks to shaded groves of trees. Their first stop was the cattle pens. Luke demonstrated how to check the animals for health, showing Clara how to recognize if a cow was hungry, tired, or restless. He was patient with her, guiding her hands gently and explaining each step. Clara found herself laughing when a curious calf nudged her shoulder, and Luke joined in, his laughter low and warm. For a moment, she forgot all the worry of the past 3 days and felt nothing but the joy of the present. After tending to the cattle, Luke led her to the barn, where they would repair a small section of fence that had weakened during a recent storm. Clara's hands ached from the effort, but she didn't mind. Luke's presence beside her made the work lighter, and the sense of accomplishment filled her with pride. She realized that this life, hard, physical, and full of responsibility, was not what she had expected. It was better. She felt useful, capable, and connected to the land in a way that city life had never allowed. By midday, they rested under the shade of a large oak tree. Luke pulled out a flask of water and offered it to Clara. She took a long drink, savoring the cool liquid as the sun blazed above. They sat quietly for a moment, listening to the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant lowing of cattle. "You know," Luke said, breaking the silence, "most folks don't make it out here if they're not ready for work. But you handled that fence like a pro." Clara smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I guess I just wanted to make a good impression." Luke chuckled. "You've already done that. More than you know." As the afternoon wore on, Luke suggested they take a ride to a nearby ridge to watch the sunset. The idea made Clara's heart flutter. She had always loved watching the sun dip below the horizon, and to do so on horseback, with the open prairie around her, seemed like a scene from one of her dreams. They rode in silence, the horses steady and calm, until they reached the top of the ridge. Clara looked out over the expanse of land, the golden grass stretching into the distance, dotted with cattle and wildflowers. The sky was painted with shades of orange, pink, and lavender, reflecting off the distant mountains. "It's beautiful," Clara whispered. Luke nodded. "Ain't it? I come up here every evening just to remind myself how lucky we are to live out here." "And I'm glad you're here to see it too." For a long while, they simply watched the sunset together. Clara felt a warmth in her chest, a mix of contentment, excitement, and curiosity. She realized that the 3 days of waiting at the depot had been worth it, not just for meeting Luke, but for the chance to start this life fully present, appreciating every detail. As twilight descended, they began their ride back to the cabin. The stars were just starting to peek out from the darkening sky. Clara felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The gentle motion of the horse, the crisp night air, and Luke's calm presence made her feel grounded. Back at the cabin, they prepared a simple dinner, sharing stories and laughter as they worked. Clara noticed that even the smallest tasks, chopping vegetables, tending the fire, washing dishes, felt meaningful when done together. Luke spoke little, but each word carried weight, and Clara found herself listening with care, noticing the subtleties in his expressions, the quiet kindness in his actions. After dinner, Luke suggested they take a walk around the property under the moonlight. Clara agreed eagerly. The ranch looked different at night. Shadows stretched across the fields, the creek sparkled under the moon, and the wind whispered through the trees. The familiar paths and buildings now seemed mysterious and magical, like the beginning of an adventure. They stopped by a small grove where wildflowers grew thick, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Clara knelt to touch a blossom, inhaling the sweet scent. Luke knelt beside her, watching quietly. "You have a good eye for beauty," he said softly. "I don't think I've seen anyone appreciate the small things as much as you do." Clara smiled, feeling warmth spread across her face. "I guess it's easier to notice when the world feels so wide and open. There's space to see things clearly." They walked back to the cabin, their conversation quiet but full of meaning. Clara felt a connection growing between them, a trust that had not existed in letters alone. She realized that this life, full of open skies, hard work, and quiet evenings, was exactly what she had been seeking. Not the letters, not the promises, but the reality unfolding around her. That night, Clara fell asleep with a smile, the sounds of the prairie lulling her into a deep, contented rest. She thought about the first day on the ranch, about the laughter, the work, and the sunset she had seen. She thought about Luke, his patience, his quiet humor, and the gentle pride he showed in his home. 3 days at the depot seemed like a distant memory now. They had been days of uncertainty and waiting, but they had led her to this place, to this life, and to the beginning of a story that she could not yet fully imagine. But she knew one thing with certainty: the adventure had just begun, and she was ready to embrace it. Outside, the prairie shimmered under the moonlight. The wind carried the scents of grass and wild flowers, and the stars stretched endlessly above. The world was full of possibilities, and Clara knew she was exactly where she belonged, beside the cowboy who had found her, in a place she could finally call home. The next morning, Clara woke to the soft chirping of birds outside the cabin. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. She stretched and yawned, thinking of yesterday's adventures. Feeding the cattle, mending fences, and riding to the ridge, it had been exhausting but thrilling. She could already feel her muscles growing stronger, her hands steadier. Luke was already outside, tending to the small garden behind the cabin. He was bent over a row of vegetables, carefully checking each plant for growth. Seeing him like this, so focused and gentle, made Clara smile. She slipped on her boots and stepped outside, brushing her hair back. "Morning," she called softly. "Morning, Clara," Luke replied without looking up. "Sleep well?" "I did," she said, walking closer. "And you?" "Couldn't ask for better," he said, straightening and wiping his hands on a rag. "Ready to tackle another day?" Clara nodded. "What's on the list today?" Luke grinned. "I thought we'd take a ride to the northern meadow. There's a creek there, and I'd like to show you how we check water levels and keep an eye on the cattle. It'll be a good skill to learn." Clara felt a flutter of excitement. Riding to new places with Luke was becoming one of her favorite parts of life on the ranch. She quickly ate breakfast, and soon they were mounting their horses. Saddles creaking, reins in hand, the morning air was crisp and sweet, carrying the scent of grass and distant wildflowers. The trail to the northern meadow was long and winding. Clara tried to remember the details Luke had pointed out the day before. The small grove of trees, the wide rock formation, the creek bending like a silver ribbon through the grass. She loved how he shared these details, quietly guiding her attention to the world around her. As they rode, Clara noticed movement in the distance, a small herd of deer grazing near the edge of the meadow. She pointed it out to Luke, and he nodded. "Good eye," he said. "This land is full of life, if you know where to look." When they reached the northern meadow, Clara was surprised at how peaceful it felt. The creek glistened in the sunlight, and wildflowers swayed gently in the breeze. Luke led her to a shallow area of the creek and showed her how to check the water flow, how to ensure the cattle had clean drinking water, and how to spot signs of trouble in the pasture. Clara listened carefully, learning quickly, and Luke's patience encouraged her to ask questions without hesitation. After working near the creek, Luke suggested they explore a small hill nearby. From the top they could see the entire northern meadow, the creek, and the far edges of the ranch. Clara felt her heart lift as she looked out over the vast landscape. The view was breathtaking, and she felt a sense of freedom she had never experienced before. "You know," Luke said quietly, standing beside her, "there are times when I just ride up here and think about how lucky I am. Life's simple, but it's full of beauty if you take the time to see it." Clara smiled. "It's true. I've never seen anything like this before. The prairie, the hills, it feels endless." Luke glanced at her, a hint of something unspoken in his eyes. "I'm glad you're here to see it with me." They spent the afternoon walking through the meadow, checking small signs in the grass, observing the wildlife, and occasionally laughing when the deer or rabbits startled at their presence. Clara felt more comfortable than ever in Luke's company. There was a rhythm to the work, the riding, and even the quiet moments together. She began to understand why life on the ranch had such a strong hold on Luke. It was alive, honest, and connected to the world in a way cities never could be. As they rode back toward the cabin, dark clouds began to gather in the distance. The wind picked up, whispering through the tall grass. Clara felt a thrill of excitement mixed with a little nervousness. Luke noticed her hesitation and leaned close. "Don't worry," he said with a smile. "We'll get back before the storm hits. The horses know the trail well, and we'll take it slow." The ride home was quiet, the only sounds being the soft thump of hooves and the occasional call of a bird. The clouds rolled closer, casting shadows over the prairie, and the sky darkened with hints of purple and gray. When they reached the cabin, the first drops of rain began to fall. Luke quickly helped Clara dismount, guiding her inside just as the rain turned into a steady drizzle. "Good timing," he said, closing the door behind them. "Looks like we made it." Clara shook her hair out and smiled, feeling the exhilaration of the ride and the sudden storm. "That was exciting," she said. "I didn't mind a little rain." Luke laughed softly. "I'm glad. Out here you learn to enjoy the weather, sun, wind, or rain. Each has its own rhythm." They settled inside the cabin, drying off and preparing a warm meal. The storm pattered gently against the roof, a comforting sound that made Clara feel safe. She looked out the window at the rain-soaked prairie, marveling at the change in color, the way the grass shimmered and sparkled in the droplets. "You know," she said, "I never imagined life could be like this. The open sky, the animals, the quiet moments. It feels like a dream." Luke looked at her thoughtfully. "It's real," he said, "and now you're part of it. That's what makes it special." After dinner, they sat by the fire, the storm still drumming softly outside. Clara felt a new closeness to Luke, a trust that had grown over shared work, laughter, and quiet observation of the world around them. She realized that the life she had imagined in letters was only a fraction of what awaited her. The reality, living it day by day, discovering the land and its rhythms and sharing it with Luke, was far richer and more rewarding. As the night grew darker, the storm easing into a light drizzle, Clara began to understand something important. Life on the ranch was not just about hard work or survival. It was about connection to the land, to the animals, and most importantly, to each other. She felt a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. Before sleep, Luke suggested one last walk outside. Clara hesitated but agreed. The rain had stopped, leaving the prairie fresh and fragrant. The stars were slowly appearing, and the moon cast a silver glow over the landscape. They walked together in silence, listening to the soft sounds of the night and feeling the calm that only nature could bring. "This place is magical," Clara whispered. Luke nodded. "It is, and now it's ours to share. I'm glad you're here, Clara. More than I can say." Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest, a combination of joy, comfort, and excitement for the days ahead. She realized that the 3 days of waiting at the wrong depot were nothing compared to the life that had opened up before her. Every moment on the ranch, every ride, every laugh, every quiet observation of the prairie was a new beginning, a fresh adventure, and a step closer to the life she had longed for. That night, as she drifted into sleep, Clara felt gratitude and hope. She had waited, she had wondered, she had worried, but now she was here, beside the cowboy who had found her in a place full of possibilities, with a life she could shape with her own hands. The adventure had just begun, and she was ready to embrace it, knowing that together she and Luke could face whatever the prairie had in store, sunshine, storms, and everything in between. Outside, the prairie was calm. The air smelled of rain and fresh grass, and the stars shone like tiny lanterns over the endless fields. Tomorrow would bring new tasks, new discoveries, and new joys. Clara smiled in her sleep, ready for the life that awaited her on the ranch, the life she had dreamed of, and the life that was now real. The morning sun rose over the prairie, casting long golden streaks across the rolling hills. Clara Bennett awoke with a feeling of anticipation she had never known. Today felt different. The ranch, which had already begun to feel like home, seemed alive with possibilities. Birds chirped energetically, and a light breeze carried the scent of wet grass from last night's rain. Clara slipped from bed, stretching and smiling. She had a plan. After a simple breakfast with Luke, she suggested they check the far pastures where the new calves were expected to arrive. Luke's eyes lit up at her enthusiasm. "I like that idea," he said. "It'll be a good way to see how you handle things on your own, too." They saddled their horses and rode across the ranch, the horses' hooves stirring up little puffs of dust as they went. Clara felt a thrill in the freedom of the ride. She had grown stronger over the past days, more confident with reins in her hands, and more aware of the land around her. Luke rode beside her, gently offering advice and encouragement, but allowing her to take the lead. When they reached the pasture, a group of cows and calves grazed peacefully. Clara took in the scene, marveling at the delicate balance of life around her. Luke showed her how to identify the newest calves, how to spot if a mother cow was protective or relaxed, and how to guide them gently if needed. Clara listened closely, following his instructions carefully. A small calf wandered toward the fence, curious about their presence. Clara approached slowly, speaking softly, and the calf responded, nudging her hand as she guided it back towards its mother. Luke watched with quiet approval, a proud smile on his face. "You're a natural," he said. "I think these animals trust you already." Clara laughed softly. "I guess all those letters prepared me for patience," she replied. "I've learned to wait and to be gentle," Luke chuckled. "That's important out here. Patience is everything." After checking the calves, they rode toward a grove of trees that marked the edge of the ranch. Luke had promised Clara he would show her a hidden spot he loved, a place that few people ever saw. When they arrived, the grove opened into a small clearing with a tiny pond in the center. The water reflected the sky like a mirror, surrounded by wildflowers and tall grass. "This is my favorite place on the ranch," Luke said softly. "I come here when I need to think, or just to enjoy a quiet moment." Clara stepped closer to the water's edge, kneeling to dip her fingers in. The cool water was refreshing, and the scene took her breath away. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Luke joined her, sitting on a nearby rock. "I wanted you to see it. There's a peace here that makes all the hard work worthwhile." They sat together in silence, listening to the gentle sounds of the pond and the breeze through the trees. Clara felt a deep sense of connection, not only to the land but to Luke. The last few days had shown her a life she could never have imagined. one of work, laughter, quiet moments, and companionship. The letters had promised one thing, but this life, the reality, was far richer. As the afternoon wore on, Luke suggested they ride further into the hills to check on a new fence line. The path was rough, with loose stones and narrow trails, but Clara felt confident. She had learned to trust her horse, to trust Luke's guidance, and most importantly, to trust herself. While repairing the fence, they laughed over small mishaps, a loose nail that slipped, a stubborn plank, and a calf that wandered too close. Each challenge was met with patience and teamwork, and Clara felt proud of how capable she was becoming. Luke's quiet encouragement made every task feel achievable. By late afternoon, the sky was painted with warm colors once again. Clara and Luke rode toward the cabin, the land glowing under the soft light. Clara felt a sense of fulfillment she had never experienced. The journey that had begun with uncertainty, 3 days of waiting at a wrong depot, had transformed into a life full of purpose, beauty, and connection. When they returned, Clara helped Luke prepare dinner. They shared stories, dreams, and laughter, the easy comfort between them growing stronger with each passing day. Clara realized that she had found more than just a husband in Luke. She had found a partner, someone who valued patience, kindness, and respect, the very qualities she had hoped for in her letters but never fully imagined finding. After dinner, Luke suggested a walk outside to enjoy the evening air. Clara agreed, slipping on a light jacket as the cool breeze swept across the ranch. The stars began to appear one by one, twinkling like tiny lanterns above the endless prairie. Luke led her to the top of a small hill, a spot where the ranch stretched out in every direction. The sight was breathtaking, the fields, the hills, and the cabin all bathed in moonlight. Clara felt a sense of wonder, a reminder that this life, simple, honest, and connected to the land, was full of magic. "Clara," Luke said, his voice soft but steady, "I know these past days have been a whirlwind. You waited 3 days at a wrong depot, unsure if you'd ever meet me, and now, here you are. I just want you to know I'm glad you came." Clara's heart swelled. "I'm glad too," she said, smiling. It was a long wait, but it led me to the right place." Luke reached for her hand, and she felt warmth spread through her chest. The connection between them had grown stronger with every shared task, every quiet conversation, every ride across the prairie. She realized that the letters had been only the beginning. Life here, with Luke and the ranch, was the real adventure. As they watched the stars together, Clara thought of her journey, the letters, the stagecoach, the dusty depot, and the 3 days of waiting. Each moment had led to this, the life she had dreamed of, now richer and fuller than she could have imagined. "I feel like I belong here," Clara whispered. "You do," Luke said, squeezing her hand gently. "And I'm glad you're part of this life. We'll face each day together, work hard, and enjoy the little moments. That's what makes it worth it." Clara smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. She realized that the adventure she had longed for wasn't just about excitement or new experiences. It was about connection, trust, and building something meaningful with someone who cared for her as much as she cared for him. At night, as Clara lay in the small bed of the cabin, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought of the wrong depot, the empty benches, the uncertainty of the first days, and the relief and joy of finally meeting Luke. Every step had been worth it, every challenge a lesson, and every moment a reminder that patience and hope could lead to something extraordinary. She drifted into sleep, the prairie quiet and calm around the cabin. The stars twinkled above, the soft rustle of the wind through the grass a lullaby. Tomorrow would bring more tasks, more discoveries, and more shared moments with Luke, but for now, Clara rested, fully content in the life she had found. Outside, the ranch lay bathed in moonlight, the fields stretching endlessly into the horizon. The wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying with it the promise of a life built together, one of hard work, joy, laughter, and quiet evenings under the stars. Clara had waited, hoped, and now at last she was home. In the warmth of the cabin, with Luke by her side and the prairie open before her, Clara knew that this was only the beginning of a beautiful life. A life full of adventure, companionship, and the quiet magic of the West. And for the first time, she felt certain that she had truly found where she belonged.